Good. All right, my name's Kathy Fitzpatrick. Welcome to the History of Hard Cider. I'm with the Rochester Hills Museum at Van Hoosen Farm. Anybody been out there? Hopefully someone. Awesome. Okay, well, if you're not familiar with our site, we're less than 5 minutes from downtown, just off of Tinkin. You can actually make your way through Letica Drive, sandwiched between DeQuinder Road and Rochester Road. So we're really close. We have about 16 acres of museum grounds. We are a nationally registered historic site, 7 different historic buildings. We have 20,000 guests out each year. We do summer camps. We just did a huge Stonewall pumpkin carving festival. We do walking public tours, and we do outreach like we have here. Not just programs, we also have a huge archives and collection. We have digitized over 5,000 photographs of downtown Rochester. In fact, if you go to like Penny Black or Tourilou on the walls, those photographs came from our archives. So we're a great resource for the community. We also have newspapers dating back to 1873 all the way up until 1990. So if you want to do research, you can also come and find us there. The site itself dates back to about 1823. But we do the history of Greater Rochester in general, which is why we're here tonight, and we're going to talk about the history of cider. This is our first hybrid event, so please have patience with us as we work with the virtual and in-person, kind of making that work. So our team tonight in the back, we have Maria. She is our virtual MC. She's with the Rochester Hills Museum Young Leaders Circle. That's a mouthful, but they are a great community added benefit to the museum, giving us great ideas like this one to move forward and reach out to y'all. We have over here our City of Rochester Hills media team, Jason, and of course Ryan over here is our head cider maker here at Fieldstone Winery and Cider. So it looks like we already have some of our first samples out here in the house. We're going to do a few housekeeping things first. So if you could take a moment and silence your cell phones if you haven't done that already. I know we haven't been to a movie theater lately, so we haven't seen those big, bold words across the screen. So if you could silence those. In person, if you need to leave your table for any reason, do put that mask on before you leave your seat. And tonight, just because we have a lot to go over, a lot of samples to taste, we're going to save all those questions that you might have till the very end of our presentation. Make sense? All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Can't really talk about the history of cider unless we talk about the history of apples first. So we're going to talk about what makes this tasty beverage. The apple that you use to make cider is actually called the Malus domestica, the domesticated apple. It comes from the Rosacea family, which is the rose family. So think apricots, think cherries, think plums, and yes, you can eat a rose. These are all edible fruits. They've actually scientifically and genetically tested the apple and traced it all the way back into Central Asia. It's a region known as the Tian Shan Mountains. So think northwest China, Kazakhstan area. And in fact, the largest city in Kazakhstan, called Alma-Ata, means father of the apple. So they're even naming cities after the apple over there. Now, it started in one region and it spread across all of Europe and Asia. The #1 reason of this widespread propagation? Bear poop. The seeds were actually dispersed by mammals, really the bear. So bear eats apple, bear digests the apple. The seed is tough enough to reject those digestive juices that we have, and it poops out the apple seed, and that's a great fertilizer, and then we have a gorgeous apple tree. And it didn't take long for people to realize how tasty and nutritious apples were. So pretty much wherever there was a trade route, you had apples. So think the Silk Road and Genghis Khan. Think Napoleon. Think Christopher Columbus. Alexander the Great said his favorite treat was the apple. Romans even had a saying. It was called ova ad malum, from the egg to the apple. Apples were so common in their meals that they started with the appetizer of the egg and they finished with the apple dessert on their table. So that's the domesticated apple. The wild apple, known as the crab apple, do you guys have any crab apples in your neighborhoods? Okay, they don't taste very good. They're really bitter and they're really sour, but that's what they actually started off with hard cider. And we know this not because they wrote about it in their journals or in their trade records, but because they were on Paleolithic cave drawings dating back 25,000 years. If you visit Switzerland today, they found actually carbonized apple seeds that date back to 2000 BC. So apples have been around forever. They've been planted and used forever, thousands of years. But the thing about apples that makes it hard for Ryan and other cider makers is that apples, if you take a gala apple and plant a gala apple seed, you are not going to get a gala apple. This is called heterozygosity. I hope I'm saying that word, no scientists in the room. But that basically means you're not going to get a clone of the original plant. That's great for the apple and its biodiversity. It's going to survive. That means if a blight comes, that means if bugs come, that means if a disease comes, that those trees are going to survive. It's going to take out one, not all of the apple trees that are in there. So luckily, Romans knew how to graft or clone apple trees. And that tradition was written down and carried on through the monasteries, carried into Europe, and eventually over here into America, and right here into the Fieldstone Winery with Ryan over here. So if you're at home and you haven't cracked open your first sample of your ciders, I'm going to actually hand it off to Ryan. He's going to tell you what you're sipping on and what kind of cider that he has for you. So Ryan?
All right, so our first, pass that mask off. So the first cider that we served that everyone got here today and people have at home is our Rogue Wit. It's our just plain apple cider. So what we do is we actually ferment it with a Belgian wit yeast. You get a nice big apple profile. It's a semi-dry cider, easy drinking, great all year round. The second cider that we have is the General. So the General came from our meter maid in town, Dave Custer. He owns a company called General Dogs, which is a hot dog cart inside of Yates and then at Home Depot. And he was making this cider at home, which is a cherry, no, Lowe's closed. So he is making this home cider. It's cherry and orange peel, but he was using juicy juice. So we did a hot dog and hard cider tasting event. I told him I'd make it a little better, and we actually sent it off to competition last year at the Clink Cap, which is the Great Lakes International Cider and Perry competition, and we took home a gold. You wouldn't know that I won a gold. You would have thought the hot dog guys won a gold. So if you guys want to enjoy those two, enjoy some donuts, and we'll get on and get to the next cider soon.
All right, we'll keep going with our history. Feel free to keep sipping on those ciders. Ryan's going to be passing out the next set of samples just so we can keep the evening flowing. My next big question, we only have about an hour. There's so much to know about apples and cider, so we're going to try and keep these to some quick little questions each time around. And my big question when I was writing this program is, why cider? Why was cider such a popular drink? And I kind of focused in on colonial America, because that's where we're living, right? We're in the United States of America, so we might as well focus to our local community here. In the late colonial period, cider was the most popular drink around. And when I say popular, I really want to clarify how popular, because it's kind of a little crazy if you ask me. By the late colonial period, so that's the late 1600s to the early 1700s, the average person drank 15 gallons of cider a year. There's 12 months in a year, so people were drinking at least a gallon or more every single month. In 1789, George Washington, our first president, was elected unanimously. The night before the election, he bought all of constituents 144 gallons of hard cider. He wasn't alone. William Henry Harrison actually campaigned to be president, labeling himself as the hard cider and log cabin candidate. He won. Didn't work out so well for him in the end, but he did win the presidency, okay? John Adams, second president of the United States of America, lived to be 90 years old. Phenomenal for that time period. And he claimed that his secret was drinking a tankard of cider every morning with his breakfast. Now, a tankard sounds fun. It's really just a wooden mug. It's not like a giant, keg like we got in front of us here. But think about it. They didn't have ibuprofen, so if you numb those joints in the morning, you're going to feel a little more loose to get going there. So what were our other options? If not cider, what would you drink? So what about beer, right? There was beer in Europe. Well, in the colonial period, there was no surplus of grains, and grains is how you made beer. Now, on top of that, any beer they did make, they would make into whiskey. Whiskey was a higher alcohol content and easier to transport from the country to the cities. You make more money, bang for your buck. It was a business kind of thing. It was also easier to grow apples. You even had Johnny Appleseed. Have you guys heard of Johnny Appleseed? He was a real man. He was named John Chapman, born in Massachusetts. He actually went ahead of all the settlers. He planted nurseries from the seeds from cider mills on the coast. And so that when settlers came, that there were already trees almost to maturity. It takes about 4 to 10 years for a tree to mature. So they were even already planted. Apples last through the winter. They double down as food for your farm animals. So you could let your pigs wander through your orchard and just eat all the apples that fell down. You don't even have to collect the food for your animals. So straight up, they were simpler, easier, and more available to grow in the United States. What about water, right? Kids aren't drinking alcohol. Yeah, they are. They were drinking alcoholic beverages. Water was nasty. In the country, you could get away with drinking the water because there were less people. Where people are, they used water for their trash cans and they used water for their bathrooms. Really gross. You can see that it's dirty, but they didn't know the concept of germs and bacteria that we know today. So water was out of the equation. Kids would drink ciderkin. It's a watered down version of cider, less intoxicating, but it's still safe. Basically, if you boiled your water or you fermented something, it was going to keep you safe because it killed all of the bacteria that was growing out there for you. So no beer. We're not drinking water. What about milk? Right? Well, at least when I grew up, milk was the thing you drank at the dinner table. Strong bones, lots of calcium. Again, in the country, milk would have worked for you. You have healthy cows feeding on natural grasses, but the city folk, milk was not good. By the time it got from the country to the city, it had spoiled. They had no refrigeration. So the city got the dairy products that lasted longer, like cheese, instead of the milk itself. Now you could have cows in the city, but they ate swill. Swill is basically the leftover grains from beer and whiskey production. So they say you are what you eat, you are what you drink. Well, that cow wasn't eating healthy, so your milk isn't healthy either. So milk was off the table as well. The best part, the healthiest thing, really was apples and apple cider. It had B12 in it, still does today, unless it's heat treated. B12 helps with your energy, your alertness, and the only other source you can really get it from is usually meat. You weren't eating a lot of meat back then, not as much as we do now. If you're a vegetarian, my friend's a vegan, she takes the B12 vitamins just because that's one thing really hard to get. So apples gave that to you. Another thing hard was vitamin C. Vitamin C was hard to come by. Apples had it, cider had it. In fact, all the ships coming over from Europe would bring barrels of apples with them, and that would stave off scurvy. So they could actually make it to the Americas healthy. Double down, that barrel in between the apples so they didn't bruise was filled with sawdust or sand. So once they ate those apples, if there was a spill on the deck, they could use the sawdust to clean up all the spills. Or if there was a huge storm, they could use the sawdust to dry up the deck up top there as well. So we can't really go on any sea voyages anytime soon, so don't be looking for those apples on your Ocean Express. But I'm going to hand it off. We can cheers to our next round of samples online if you want to crack open those next 2 bottles that Maria will help you out with. So enjoy.
The next 2 ciders that we brought out were the Paint Creek Paddler, which is our pineapple jalapeno hard cider. It's going to smell like it's going to burn you real bad, but it's actually not. It has a nice little tingle in it. So the funny story about that one is my dad, Pat, who's the owner here, thought it was not the greatest idea to do pineapples and jalapenos, so he went on vacation, I believe, 3 years ago, and I made it while he was gone and sold the whole keg. So obviously we decided that, oh, this will work, and so we started doing that. We actually won a medal for it a couple years ago. And the second one you have is the lemonade ginger. Lemonade ginger was actually one of our employees' ideas. We were looking for a fun cider last summer. We took it to the Cider Days Festival and couldn't keep it in stock. It was that popular. It's just nice, light, easy drinking, perfect for a summer, and obviously with COVID, it lasted a lot longer than we expected. So enjoy.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started with our next segment. We'll still be bringing samples in and out. This next segment is down and dirty. We talked about apples, we talked about the history of cider, but how did they make those apples turn into the cider? Now this is Ryan's wheelhouse, so hopefully he's not rolling his eyes at me too much when I tell you how apple cider is made. But then, versus now, it's a basic natural process. It's been the same for thousands of years, the way that people have actually made apple cider. My favorite tale of apple cider is actually Henry David Thoreau's. He's an American transcendentalist, poet, author, and he's actually taken a very lazy approach. He lets Mother Nature do basically all of the work. So his idea of making apple cider was in the fall time, letting the apples freeze on the tree. The sun would warm it up on a nice warm afternoon, and then he just plucked that apple off the tree, and he described it as better than any bottled cider that I know of, rich, sweet cider, which I'm better acquainted with than wine. So Henry David Thoreau preferred his hard cider over wine. And he said, all apples are good in this state, and your jaws are the cider press. They have borrowed a flavor from heaven through the medium of air in which they hang. So he literally just let the fruit hang on the tree, freeze, thaw, and you have cider. And that's really what it comes down to. You basically have your starches turning to sugars and sitting out in nature with natural yeast. Now, that lazy approach doesn't work if you're not by that tree all day. So if you want to be in the city and drinking your cider, you got to come up with another way of getting it there. So we'll skip ahead, we'll skip actually backwards to a medieval recipe that if Ryan tried to make and use this recipe, it would still get him to his hard cider that he has today. So I'm going to have to explain a little vocabulary, so bear with me here. It says, gather the crabs as soon as the kernels turn black. That's step one. They're using crab apples. They don't have a domesticated apple. So crabs aren't seafood, it's the apple. And the seeds start off brown, and when those starches turn to sugars, the seeds actually turn black. So one way you know if your apple is ripe is if you cut the apple open and you have black seeds inside your apple. Okay, so that's step one. Step two in this medieval recipe says, lay them in a heap to sweat, take them into troughs, and crush with beetles. Okay, so let's talk about sweating apples, then we'll get to the beetles. Sweating apples, you really just picked your apple and let it set in the barn instead of letting it set in the field. If you let it set in the field, deer are going to come eat it, your pigs are going to come eat it, bugs are going to eat it, they're going to get nasty and dirty. So you want to put them in the barn, and that's actually so they can develop more of a flavor. Cider apples, you need those stronger flavors, acids, tannins, bitters, sweet, combining together. Now, the beetles, that is a word for a wooden mallet. So collect the apples and then crush them with a wooden mallet, okay? Today, I brought with me a historic apple cider press. So you can see we're not using troughs. We aren't using presses. We're using a grinder with a flywheel that you can just start tossing apples in there. It comes straight into the barrel, and then we can press it down that way as well. So I skipped ahead. Step number 3 is make a bag with coarse hair cloth and fill it with crabs. So we don't use horsehair anymore. We use something like a cheesecloth, or you can actually, if you want to make cider, you can buy something like this at the beer or hop store as well to use. Farmers could have used straw to press out the apples. The concept is you want the juice separate from the mash and the seeds. Any seeds that get in your juice is going to be very bitter and acidic. It's not going to taste any good. So step number 4, press the cider and run the liquor into the hogshead. Won't lie, I had to look up what a hogshead was myself. It's a barrel. You just have to put it in the barrel. So from that point on, you let it sit for about 4 months and you have cider. What's happening is you have natural yeast and bacteria. It's foaming at the top. It's actually very hazy. It's not very clear like you're drinking tonight. And at the very end, a traditional farmhouse cider, they'll add in a little sugar or a sweetener, and that raises the alcohol content. There we go, thank you. Raises the alcohol content to about 7%. So if you freeze that stuff in the wintertime, all the water comes up to the top, turns into ice, you scrape that off, and you get liquor. You get Applejack. That's how you get Applejack. So that's kind of close to maple syruping too. So now that medieval recipe would get you to the same cider. You can see that with some fermenting cider from just a couple days ago. But that medieval recipe skipped 2 things. Number 1, you got to clean the apples. If you don't clean the apples, you're going to get some nasty cider. It's going to be harder to control and get that flavor that you really want as the head cider master here. And number 2, wassailing. We don't do this today either ways. I don't know. Do you go wassailing, Ryan? No. Okay. Wassailing is a New Year's Eve tradition, so if you're looking for something to do at home or out in nature, this might be for you guys. You can do it on New Year's Eve or 12th night. Get your friends together, dress up in your coats, get some cider, run out to your local orchard, start banging on trees with sticks, splash some cider, and sing some songs. That was supposed to wake up your trees and get them ready for spring, and it was supposed to actually ensure that you had a good apple crop and that you could have some nice cider for the next season. So with that fun fact, I'll let you drink up. I'll introduce Ryan over here, and he'll tell you what your next samples are before our last little bit here.
All right, so the next 2 ciders that I brought out were the Sanilla. Sanilla is our cinnamon vanilla cider. It is our most popular cider. We took home a gold medal for this in 2018. And the other cider I brought out is our GPA. GPA is actually one of our original ciders. So when we started making cider about 6 years ago, we had Rogue, GPA, and a hop hard cider. Excuse the backseat driving over here. So GPA is our ginger peach apple. We use fresh Romeo peaches and ginger in it. It has about a pound of peaches per gallon of cider is what we like to use. All the peaches come from Verellen Orchards right up on 29 Mile. So we try to get them as local as possible. Enjoy.
Close to the end of the night for us. Now, it would be a disservice to you guys tonight if I did not talk about the word cider itself before I let you go. So this little segment that we're going to end with is talking about cider, its fall in America, why we call it something different from the rest of the world, and then how it's come back into the modern life and why we're sitting here drinking artisan hard cider right now this evening. So if you go anywhere else in the world, if you go to Europe, if you go to Russia, if you go to Australia, and you order a cider, it will be an alcoholic beverage. Only in America does the word cider refer to what the rest of the world calls a sweet cider. So here we have cider and sweet cider, or alcoholic, sorry, and the rest of the world, they have hard cider and sweet cider. Does that make sense? Okay. So one of the reasons for that is the history and the downfall of cider right here in the United States of America. So we went from this popular drink where presidents are buying people's votes with hard cider on their campaign trails, handing it out at their stump rallies. They're literally, William Henry Harrison was standing on a tree stump, drinking cider, and asking people to vote for him. Okay, so what happened? Industrialization happened. You had a shift of people from the country to the city. And when that happened, that unfiltered, unpasteurized cider, it didn't make it to the city in a very good condition at that point. It's not going to taste as well. People started tainting the cider, watering it down so they could make more money. It was really heavy and awkward to take to the city itself. In fact, a newspaper article in 1890 said that if you tried to order a cider in a saloon, tavern, or bar, the stuff sold was being a villainous compound of vinegar, glucose, whiskey, and pepper. Not even apples, okay? So they were trying to fake apple cider. So the quality of apple cider just kind of plummeted. Part of that was because orchards were abandoned. If you don't have people in the country to work and pick and tend to those orchards, you're not going to have the apple selection to make your ciders for yourself, okay? A new wave of immigrants from Europe came in. You had Germans coming in, and you had Irish people coming in. What did they love? They loved their beer. They brought their beer and their hops and their love of that tradition, so that actually took over the cider as well. And the final nail in the coffin, which you might already guessed, is the temperance movement. Downfall of the temperance movement, by the time Prohibition was enacted in 1919, the production of cider slipped from 13 million gallons to 5 million gallons. Basically what happened is that people went out and burned down the orchards. Sympathetic farmers actually chopped down their apple trees. If there's no apples, right, that's what we started with tonight, you don't have any cider. Okay, so by the time that alcohol was allowed in your life again, all of the product and material that you needed, you had to wait another 10 to 15 years for those orchards to come up. So with that beer and ale, the Midwest was the breadbasket at that point, so you had more hops. You had a lot more options. Remember, we talked about water wasn't clean, milk wasn't clean, beer wasn't around because you didn't have grains. Well, guess what? It was becoming modern America. We had all of those things again. So really, cider took a tanking, temperance movement kicked it out, and it wasn't until almost closer until the 90s when you have people like the family here at Fieldstone bringing back the artisan cidership. Example here, in 1996, there were 5.3 million gallons of cider being sold. Okay, compare that just 6 years in 1990, so 6 years before that, not even a million, 271,000 gallons sold. So in about 5 years, it went up 4 or 5-fold the amount produced here in the United States of America. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ryan. He can tell you a little bit about the Fieldstone Winery and Cidery here, some of the endeavors that they do with the master cider. I know the history. I don't really know the modern cider and brewing. That's not my specialty, so I'm going to pass it off to Ryan to top off the night for you guys.
All right, so I'm actually going to play a little bit into her history thing. So hard cider, obviously, they made this big comeback about 5-6 years ago. But in Michigan, we have an orchard called Uncle John's Orchard. It's up in St. John's, Michigan. It's run by Mike Beck. Mike Beck is sometimes referred to as the godfather of hard cider. He's been making it since the 90s. This is somebody who cares way more about the industry than about his own brand. I've called him up, say, hey, I need cider. Can you help me out? No questions asked. Come up, get it. Which was something great to have, and that's how this industry has grown the way it has. So the last two ciders that we poured for you though today are the Espresso Royale, which is tonight is the first night we're serving the new version of Espresso Royale. We have partnered up with Desert Oasis right down the street. They used to be our neighbors a couple doors down, and they moved over there about 5-6 years ago, I believe now. And so Nathan Mood, who is one of the owners, and he is also the head roaster there. We worked with him, and we came up with a nice coffee to put in there. And then the second one is, obviously, it's fall. You gotta copy off what Starbucks does sometimes. And and we got our pumpkin spice. Our pumpkin spice is not an over-the-top pumpkin spice. In all the ciders, you can tell there's nothing that's gonna really take over. So you kind of get a little apple, you get a little bit of everything in there. But a little bit about Fieldstone. So we opened up in December 2003. My dad and uncle, Pat and Steve, opened the place up. We were a winery. We That's all we did. Hard cider came about when myself and my our old manager, Jordan Southern, who's actually one of the partners at Penny Black now, somehow we convinced my dad to let us make a bunch of apple wine one year. So we were doing this big spiced apple thing. We got about 900 gallons of cider in to make apple wine. We stole 55 gallons out of the batch, so when cider was starting to come out good, and we made cider. We had his 30th birthday or some sort of party for Jordan, and we put it on tap, and it became part of our business. And now we've switched into, we started with 3 taps, we went to 6, now we have 10 taps. They rotate throughout the years. Our core ciders are the Sonilla, Rogue, Batch 36, and Hazy. Batch 36 and Hazy are both drier ciders. That's why we didn't put them in the pack today. Shockingly enough, people who actually like dry wine tend to like sweeter ciders. Dry ciders haven't really become a thing yet. I bet in about 5-10 years, people are going to start to switch, and it'll be kind of nice for me because making a dry cider is a lot easier than making a sweeter cider. You just let it sit, ferment out, and you're good. But if you have any questions, though, please ask. Maria, are we on to that, or?
We are. Yep. We actually do have one question that someone messaged to me. So I wrote it down over here. Can I make hard cider at home?
Yes. So you can actually make hard cider at home. A couple different ways you can do it. You can just let it wild ferment. But what you have to do, the best way to do is go to your local orchard and buy their cider. Depending on the cider, some have been pasteurized, some have sulfites in them to keep them, so that they stay longer, and they're trying to kill those wild yeast. The best way to do it is actually kill the wild yeast and then pitch your own yeast. We use a couple different varieties of yeast here. We use traditional wine yeast. We use the wit yeast, obviously, as we put in the rogue wit, and then our hazy apple actually uses a Scottish ale yeast. So you can do all those different things. You can make it at home. You can make your own flavors, add whatever you want to it. Be creative with it. Anything else? That's it for you. Does anyone here have any questions? Kendra.
Did Adam even
All right. We'll take it back to history for a real quick question. Some fun bar trivia or home trivia for you is the whole Adam and Eve and eating the apple off of the tree. Well, the domesticated apple probably wasn't in that region at that time period. It probably hadn't made it there. The reason is the word Malus domestica. Malus is also the root for bad, mal, in many languages. So it kind of took this connotation of being evil and pulling you into that bad side of things. So when people rewrote this history of this time period, looking back, they wrote the apple in. It was actually a fruit, the forbidden fruit. And they chose to put the apple, because of the word malus, as the forbidden fruit. And many different cultures write a different fruit in. So sometimes it's the fig, sometimes it's the pomegranate, sometimes it's even a grape leaf that is on the forbidden fruit of the tree. So yes, maybe it was an apple, maybe it was a fig. No one really knows, but it was the forbidden fruit in that story. So, anybody else? All right. Well, thank you guys for coming out here tonight. Thanks for joining us online. We'll be here if you have any more questions. I think Maria might be hanging out a little bit on the virtual MC. So hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you, guys.